In June of 1983, Cindy Paulson, a 17-year-old sex worker in Anchorage, ran for her life. She had met a man the night before who solicited her for sex. He was soft-spoken, wore glasses, had pock marks in his face, and looked like he could be somebody's grandpa, according to Paulson. He wanted her to come to his place. Now, normally, Cindy would know better, but the man convinced her he'd had girls at his house before. He offered her more than double the amount for her standard rate of service. As the man drove Cindy, he turned down a road, and she saw a sign that would make her stomach turn. Dead end. An ominous sign. Cindy realized she wasn't going to be okay. When the two got into his garage, the man forced Cindy to go down into his basement, where he paid her. As she was putting the money in her backpack, the man handcuffed Paulson to a chair. He then proceeded to rape her. Afterwards, Paulson went to the bathroom. The windows were bolted shut. As she realized there was no way to escape, she heard the sound of chains. The man wrapped a collar around her neck and chained her to a pillar in his basement. She was given a towel to lie down on as the man went to take a nap. As he slept, Cindy saw a bullet hole at the bottom of the pillar. From here, Cindy had the gruesome realization that she wasn't the first victim. Throughout the night, she memorized every little detail about the basement. From this, she realized that her captor was a hunter. On the wall were stuffed fish, rams, and on the floor, a bearskin rug. There was a pool table where she decided that, given the chance, Cindy was going to grab the pool cue and beat his head with it. The next morning, the man came to Cindy and told her that he was going to take her in his plane, fly to his cabin, and make love to her there before letting her go. As she got ready, the man refused to let Cindy put on shoes. She lay in a brown tarp that covered the back seat of his Buick. The handcuffs were digging so tight into her skin that her hands were bleeding. The man drove to Merrill Airfield and went to grab some things from his trunk. This was Cindy's chance. She has no recollection of how the back door opened, but as soon as she realized it was, she darted out of the back seat. She ran barefoot down the runway as her kidnapper chased her from behind with a .357 Magnum. Cindy Paulson was being hunted, like so many of his victims before her. A respectable family man hidden in plain sight who used the northern wilderness to cover his killing spree. It's a gruesome, tragic story that sadly has more victims than just Cindy. It's the horrifying tale that we're going to talk about today. So hello everybody. Today we're going to talk about the story of Robert Hansen, also known as the Butcher Baker serial killer. Most of the time I am very hesitant to talk about killers. I mean, granted, the topic of murder comes up a lot in my videos across both channels, but often I find just talking about serial killers in the true crime space can often devolve into almost mystifying, if not glorifying, the details of a monster. Aside from the serial killer iceberg, I rarely talk about people like Jeffrey Dahmer or Ed Gein or John Wayne Gacy. But way back when I did the serial killer iceberg, there were a couple cases that stood out to me that I felt like the story was worth telling for one reason or the other. One of those cases was Robert Hansen. For one, the avenue of his monstrosity is almost Machiavellian. He would hunt people for sport in a way that most often is relegated to fiction. Other reason I feel this story is worth telling is because of the case's survivor. Cindy Paulson was a survivor like no other, and I think the depravity of what Robert did was only stopped because of this girl's determination to keep living. So if for no other reason, I think the story is worth recounting for her part in it. So viewer discretion advised. As you could probably tell from the intro, several of the details from this case are quite intense. But as mentioned, we feel it is a case worth remembering. So if you want to stick around for it, then hang out after the ad as we talk about the horrific rise and eventual defeat of Robert Hansen. Do you like this scary lighting? Well, I'm here to tell you about something even scarier: overpaying for poor wireless phone plans. That's right, millions of Americans are doing it every year with seemingly no way to stop. Thankfully, you can get out of the cycle of torment now thanks to today's sponsor, Mint Mobile. And you may ask yourself, what is Mint Mobile? Well, Mint Mobile is a premium wireless carrier offering no contract plans and operating on the nation's largest 5G network. And by large, I really mean large, considering they supply 5G to 98% of Americans and 4G LTE coverage to 99% of Americans. And their data plans are tailored to fit you. You can get 6 gigabyte, 17 gigabyte, 23 gigabyte, or unlimited data every month. And their plans include unlimited talk and text and free calls to Mexico, Canada, and the UK, as well as a hotspot with up to 20 gigabytes of data on their unlimited plans. One of the coolest things about Mint Mobile is how you switch over. Most people don't switch carriers because they figure it can be a headache, and often it is. But with Mint Mobile, you can do the entire thing right now from your phone. That's because Mint Mobile has taken the online shopping experience and brought it to phone plans. That means no stores, no pushy salespeople, and no waste of time. In minutes, you can browse plans, sign up, and activate with an eSIM card from your home. And then you may say, well, I don't want to switch my phone, or especially my phone number. And while you can put Mint Mobile on a new phone, you can also bring your own phone and keep your number as well as all of your existing contacts. And you may say, well, what if I don't like it? But even that's covered, because Mint Mobile has a 7-day unconditional money-back guarantee. So if you think you might like it, there's no harm in trying it out now and seeing if you still like it after a week. And if you're looking to get in, then now's the perfect time. That's because if you head to the link in the description at mintmobile.com/wendigang, you can get in on Mint Mobile Summer Promo. That means plans for 3, 6, or 12 months of premium wireless service for just $15 a month. That's right, $15 a month of wireless internet, data, and access to the nation's largest 5G network. Again, all right from wherever you're setting. Again, that's Mint Mobile Summer Promo that you can check out in the link in the description at mintmobile.com/wendigang to get in on their offer today. Thank you to Mint Mobile for sponsoring the channel. Their link will be in the description, and we are now back to the video. We're going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. In the 1960s, Robert Hansen was in his second marriage with a woman named Darla, with whom he had 2 kids. Darla was a special education teacher who kept Hansen under the radar by taking him to church. Wanting to build a better life, Hansen moved his family from his home state of Iowa to Anchorage, Alaska. Hansen opened his own bakery and was well liked by his neighbors. Shortly after settling into his new home, Hansen got his pilot's license. According to A&E TV, quote, purchased a small airplane, ostensibly for hunting in the Alaskan bush. Hansen set several local hunting records, including a world record in the fall of 1971 for shooting a Dall sheep with a bow and arrow. Hansen fit in perfectly with Anchorage's outdoor culture, which coincided with one of the most intense periods of modern Alaska's economic industry. When the Trans-Alaska Pipeline Authorization Act was signed in 1973, the pipeline boom began soon after. Oil began flowing in June of 1977. The pipeline ran 800 miles from Prudhoe Bay in northern Alaska to Valdez, which was just miles east of Anchorage. When construction of the pipeline began in 1975, more than 70,000 people were employed and nearly 30,000 workers and contractors were staffed on the project. To accommodate the influx of workers, camps were set up along the pipeline's route. But what was most remembered about these camps was the partying, which involved tons of alcohol and drugs. Many Alaskan cities along the route, including Anchorage, attracted large numbers of men making good cash. These boom towns fostered criminal activity through their purveyors: prostitutes, pimps, con artists, and drug dealers. Their goal was to exploit the construction workers from the money they were raking in. A shadow vice economy was growing alongside Alaska's legitimate one. In fact, in the mid-1970s, the Fairbanks Police Department, quote, estimated between 40 and 175 prostitutes were working in the city of 15,000 people. The concentrated number of sex workers in the area caused a shootout between warring pimps that police had to break up. But it would prove a challenge, as many police officers and state troopers left their posts to work as private security for the pipeline project, which, as you can imagine, didn't help curb crime. And who could blame them? The men were offered wages that were exponentially more than what they were making in the public sector. And as always, quick riches saw abrupt losses, and sudden disappearances were commonplace. As a result, Anchorage in the late 1970s and early 80s was a place where a woman could vanish and nobody would notice. All of this is relevant to the story because all of Hansen's victims were young women. And according to Alaska's Assistant DA, Frank Rothschild, quote, mostly runaways who had no family support and were out in the world on their own. The Alaskan wild provided a perfect environment for Robert Hansen to hunt and kill. Under the mask of a good neighbor exterior, Bob the Baker, as he was known, used Anchorage's remote terrain, vice economy, and social anonymity to prey on vulnerable women. The killer had a perfect cover. He was married with 2 children. He was a successful small business owner with a bakery that all the police frequented for coffee and donuts. Hansen's bakery was minutes away from Merrill Field and the 4th Avenue Strip in downtown Anchorage. Even the bakery's operating hours were perfect for hunting women of the night. Hansen started his day early in the morning and was done by noon. But before he was called a serial killer, Hansen had already crossed the line of lawlessness. And that's because of a pattern that nobody connected until years later. Robert Hansen was born on February 15th of 1939 in Iowa. Growing up, Hansen suffered bad acne and had a stutter, which he blamed for his unsuccessful luck with women. He would later say, quote, "I was, I guess what you call frustrated. I would see my friends going out on dates and had a tremendous desire to do the same thing. As is common with killers who target women, most of them felt that they were owed something by the world, that something most often being women. They frequently see the world through the eyes of themselves, and therefore through the eyes of men. So when other men are successful with women, it's not that the woman is a person who wants to be with that guy, it's that the woman is a trophy that they've not yet earned, even though they deserve it." Hansen had shown warning signs for more than a decade before his killings. In 1961, he was convicted of his first felony in Pocahontas, Iowa, for, quote, "willfully and maliciously setting a fire to and burning a motor vehicle." Hansen had wanted revenge for getting bullied in high school, and so he burned down a school garage filled with buses. Hansen served 20 months of a 3-year sentence for the felony, and during this time, his first wife divorced him. While in prison, he was diagnosed with, quote, "manic depression and periodic schizophrenic episodes," and according to his diagnosis, seemed obsessed with getting back at people who he felt had done him wrong. Which, as mentioned a moment ago, you can see how he applied this to women. The psychiatrist also noted that Hansen had a, quote, "infantile personality." Now, while much of these particular diagnoses are now considered outdated, some symptoms of the psychological profile involve emotional immaturity, volatile moods, and a low tolerance for frustration. All things that seem consistent regardless of specific terminology that may be used. Other key factors from Hansen's childhood were his domineering father, who constantly belittled him and took advantage of him when he worked at the family's bakery, where Hansen trained. Millie DeWall, one of Hansen's former classmates, described the father as a, quote, "good person but very domineering," adding that Hansen and his father, quote, "had a very dysfunctional relationship together." A former friend of Hansen's, Glenn Johnson, remembered, quote, "his dad would just lay into him." It seems that through this, Hansen's mother was unable to defend her son. And as I've talked about on this channel and Wendigoon, typically people who are this disturbed later in life can trace it back to childhood abuse. And obviously, that's not to say that people who go through abuse are predisposed to, being evil, but abuse at an early age does have the potential to fracture and make the person much, much worse for it. As if to rub it in, Hansen watched his older sister receive an outpouring of praise from his father throughout their childhood. Hansen failed to fit in as a youth, despite joining the high school football team and the junior police. They even misspelled his name in the school yearbook, calling him Robert Hanson with an O. Hansen's classmates even witnessed moments that would foreshadow his behavior in adulthood. Leland Samuelson recalled a randomly aggressive encounter with Hansen in the high school locker room. Samuelson had no idea why Hansen was mad at him, but Hansen came in with, quote, "his head down like he was gonna butt me in the wall. He really came at me." DeWall, the girl mentioned from before, also spoke to Hansen's troubles with women. One of her female friends ended up alone with Hansen one night while the other friends were out having fun. The next morning, when DeWall's friend told her about the experience, she was quoted as saying, "never again." Hansen even told DeWall, quote, "Millie, if I ever see a cat, I will drive in the ditch to kill it because it kills the birds I like to hunt." I mean, I've heard of people wanting to hurt animals. That's common with serial killers at a young age. They'd hurt animals and stuff like that. And I've also heard of people not wanting cats to be out because they kill birds. I think that's the first time I've heard someone say they don't like cats killing birds because they want to kill the bird. I want to harm an animal, and it's that specific animal, but this other animal's doing it, so I guess I want to hurt that one too. These early anecdotes paint a type of personality consistent with Hansen's psychiatric evaluation. When the Hansens moved to Alaska, Darla took her husband to church as a possible attempt to distance him from his sordid past. That would not last, however, as the 1970s saw Hansen face 3 more felony convictions. Each time, he walked away without serious consequence. The first felony occurred in December of 1971, when Hansen was arrested twice, once for abducting and attempting to rape an 18-year-old real estate secretary named Susan Heppard, and the second arrest was for raping an 18-year-old sex worker named Robin Patterson. In November of 1971, Hansen was sitting at a stoplight when he saw Heppard in a car next to him and thought she was giving him the eye. His next move was to follow her home and ask to use her phone book. 11 days later, he came back to her residence with a gun. Despite threatening to shoot her if she screamed, Heppard screamed anyway, and Hansen ran off. When he was asked about the incident more than a decade later by Alaskan state troopers, Hansen admitted that his actions were the result of an urge. You know, the urge to take a gun and try to kidnap a woman, right? But even this first instance of what would later be many shows how obsessed he was with the idea of having sexual power over women. Based on his statements to Heppard, it's highly likely that Hansen possessed a psychological complex known as the Madonna Whore Complex, also known as the Madonna Mistress Complex, in which men see women as either saintly Madonnas or debased whores. When Hansen approached Heppard in her apartment, she was getting ready to shower and was wearing a robe or towel. He was mesmerized as she was standing in front of him, nearly nude, talking. Hansen said of this, quote, "This is where I more or less would expect something like that out of a girl that would see in a bar dancing topless or whatever or something. But this here was not the type of girl in any way, shape, or form." In other words, in Hansen's mind, there were women that were worthy of respect and women who were not. This woman doing something as simple as standing in her own house, getting out of the shower, and talking to him, in Hansen's mind suddenly qualified her with the others. Women who, as Hansen would see it, deserve whatever is coming to them. And keep in mind, through the midst of this, Hansen is married with kids. That doesn't stop him from seeing other women and wanting to have them because, as far as he sees, it's what they have coming. Hansen pleaded no contest to assault with a deadly weapon in the first offense involving Heppard, and the charge involving the sex worker was dropped as part of Hansen's no contest plea bargain. In fact, Hansen was awaiting trial for the assault charge when he kidnapped Patterson at gunpoint outside of the Nevada club. Again, while Hansen was awaiting trial for the situation with Heppard, he kidnapped Patterson outside of a nightclub, bound Patterson's hands with shoelaces, and headed south. As he drove, Hansen kept pulling to the side and telling her he wanted to make love to her. He tried kissing her, he threatened to slash her bra with his knife. Patterson would tell authorities that she told Hansen, quote, "No, I don't want to do it in the car." So Hansen eventually got a motel. He expected her to fight, but she didn't. According to the report, the two attempted to have sex, but he failed to orgasm. On the way back to Anchorage, Hansen told Patterson that he'd kill her if she told anyone of this, and she had to talk him out of driving her deep into the wilderness. Now, again, Patterson was a sex worker, so initially it seems that she went along with everything, but Hansen kept insisting to do more and more. From the tying her up, to wanting to do it in the car, to threatening to cut off her bra. She was made very uneasy, again, especially on the way back when he threatened to kill her and then tried to drive her out into the woods. Because of this, as you can imagine, Patterson was a little freaked out and reported him to the police. Before records were stored on computers, the cops in Anchorage had what they called a, quote, asshole book, which contained photos of every single predator that was reported. Patterson went through each page and every photo before landing on Hansen. If it wasn't for his previous assault charge, it's possible that Hansen would have never been in the asshole book and therefore would never have been identified. Patterson spoke to Police Sergeant Walter Gilmore of the Alaskan State Troopers and said, quote, "That Robert Hansen guy is probably a premeditated, cold-blooded killer who's killed before. He said he killed before, and everything he said was absolutely true. And if you've got a young girl who's been killed around the same time and in the same area, then I believe it was Hansen who killed her." Ultimately, Hansen was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison, but was released after 6 months to a halfway house and then released on parole only a year later. Court-ordered psychiatrist evaluated Hansen and concluded that he suffered from a dissociative mental illness. Psychiatrists suggested that Hansen's criminal activity was a result of that illness. The same month of December in 1971, authorities found the body of an 18-year-old Celia Beth Van Zanten, who had gone missing just days before. Hansen was believed to be involved with Zan Vanten's death, but vehemently denied killing her. It's important to note, however, that both Van Zanten's and Patterson's abductions were similar. Quote, "They were taken to the same area, their hands bound, they were stripped to prevent escape, and their bras slashed, or at least in Patterson's case, threatened to be." Van Zanten also lived within a mile of the real estate secretary's apartment. It would seem that Hansen frequented the area to look for women. A few years later, in October of 1975, Hansen was suspected of kidnapping and sexually assaulting a woman 1 month earlier in September. A victim's advocate from the Anchorage Rape and Assault Center alerted Alaska State Troopers to report that one of her clients, a sex worker, disclosed to the advocate that she was abducted at gunpoint and raped. The victim was so terrified of her attacker that she refused to file a police report. When she described the man to the troopers, her description matched Hansen. She even remembered the man's license plate, and when the plate numbers came back, it belonged to one of Hansen's vehicles. The troopers provided a photo of Hansen, and the victim positively identified him as her assailant. However, the victim refused to give a statement and subsequently fled Alaska. Seems whatever he said to her certainly got through. During his interview with the authorities, Hansen denied owning a firearm. He was already a convicted felon and thus forbidden from owning one. He also denied abducting and raping his accuser. Hansen's account was that he met her at a topless bar in South Anchorage and offered her a ride home. Hansen told the troopers that during the drive, the victim offered to have sex with him for $100 and was upset when he declined her offer. Hansen said he dropped her back at the bar and ultimately the charges were dropped. Again, with her fleeing Alaska, it's hard to prosecute. Hansen's next conviction came 1 year later in 1976 when he was arrested for larceny after stealing a chainsaw from Fred Mayer, an Anchorage department store. Hansen's parents were visiting for the holidays in November that year. And while Hansen was walking the aisle, he came across a set of chainsaws that evoked a conversation he and his father had a few weeks earlier while cutting wood. Hansen's father wished he had his own chainsaw to help cut wood for camping trips with Hansen's mother. Hansen offered up his own chainsaw to his father, but he refused. The interaction prompted Hansen to take the chainsaw. He didn't even bother purchasing it. He fished out an old receipt and placed it on the package as he walked past the checkout. What he didn't realize was that he was being followed. When Dr. Alan Parker of the Langdon Clinic administered a psychological evaluation of Hansen, he concluded that the emotional and personality testing indicated a, quote, markedly disturbed man who was somewhat antisocial and paranoid by nature and had a relatively weak ego. The test also indicated, quote, severe heterosexual conflicts both with a desire for women and a fear that he would not be able to relate to them. Additionally, Hansen, according to the evaluation, had free-floating anxiety and was capable of acting out on impulses. And he was aware of these impulses within his personality. Based on the tests, the results indicated a, quote, disintegration of his personality that reached a psychotic or potentially high psychotic level, as well as a high schizophrenia scale, high manic scale, and high antisocial scale. Robert Hansen was obsessive and worse, was unable to resist. He felt forced to give in to those impulses. Stealing a chainsaw would pale in comparison to what he would end up doing to the young women he stalked. So why then is the narrative of Hansen's good neighbor image such a prominent part of his legacy? I mean, how is this guy like selling coffee and donuts when his criminal past paints the diametrically opposite picture of a harmless baker? With arson, theft, and violent assaults on his record, not to mention the subject of psychiatric concern, how did no one come to suspect Hansen until it was too late? How did a guy with 2 charges related to kidnapping and raping women fly by for so long because he was just that nice? Well, the error was not that no one had ever seen the deviants. The error was that these prior incidents were treated as separate episodes rather than as part of an escalating pattern of lawlessness. Alaska's assistant DA pointed out that, quote, at least 3 of Hansen's 4 convicted murders took place during the time that he would have been in prison had he served the full 5 years. Think about that. If he would have stayed in jail, at the very least, 3 girls would be alive. Society had Hansen in its legal grasp, yet let him go each time. Even Superior Court Judge Ralph Moody said as much, quote, I cannot think of a bigger indictment of society than we have here. This gentleman here has been known to us for several years. We've turned him loose several times. No one prosecuted him or judged him as hard as they should have. Because of that, he was able to live under the radar, despite what so clearly should have been seen as an escalating behavior. Granted, a lot of that was because this was the 70s and record keeping and talk between different jurisdictions wasn't what it is now, but all of those combining factors is how he was able to get by for so long. Hansen used the time during his delayed sentencing for the chainsaw to apply for a pilot's license. However, The FAA discovered a problem when Hansen's doctor revealed in his notes that Hansen was using lithium for his stuttering. The FAA told Hansen that he would be unable to obtain a pilot's license certificate while he was using lithium. So Hansen went to another doctor, but the FAA saw through Hansen's ruse and plainly wrote to him explaining why he was being rejected. Quote, "Your history of a nervous condition requiring the use of disqualifying medication and the falsification of your FAA medical application." Despite this initial snag, Hansen persevered. There are strict rules in place regarding the issuance of a pilot's license. However, those rules do not apply to the purchase of a civilian aircraft. Money's king, and Hansen purchased several planes over the years. It would seem that vendors cared less about lithium than the FAA. What was surprising was how Hansen was able to register those planes in his own name, again, despite not having a license. An interesting note is that Robin Patterson's kidnapping and assault were done with Hansen's car. Even the woman mentioned at the beginning of this video, Cindy Paulson, was picked up in downtown Anchorage by Hansen in his Buick Century. Given that, because of the Patterson case, his license plates were now recognized, it would seem that Hansen was eager to incorporate flying into his operations. Instead of risking getting pulled over with a naked sex worker handcuffed in his back seat, what better way to bring a victim to the remote Alaskan wilderness than by airplane? So, from 1971 to 1983, Hansen hunted prostitutes, exotic dancers, and female bartenders whenever his wife and children were out of town. He often cruised the seediest areas of Anchorage in search of his next target. Again, that wasn't always the case, as we saw with the real estate secretary. Initially, Hansen would target any woman who caught his eye, but he learned that strippers and prostitutes were harder to find and unlikely to be missed. As he did with Cindy Paulson, Hansen would offer his victims money to get them into his truck. He'd pull his gun, tie them up, and drive off to a remote cabin, where Hansen would rape and then release them, threatening them from going to the police. Hansen would sometimes let his victims go free in the wilderness before he hunted them with his rifle. That was the case with 24-year-old Johanna Messina, who was trained as a nurse but left her husband and family back in New York to wander west with her German Shepherd. Along the way, she hitchhiked to Alaska, where she planned to find a job at a cannery. When she arrived in Alaska, Messina found housing at a rooming house in Seward owned by a veterinarian and his wife. Despite spending most of her time in her room reading books, Messina had a somewhat adversarial relationship with her fellow roommates, both through her own behavior and her dog's, who was extremely overprotective. In fact, when she was found dead, most people, quote, who had known her dog wondered how anyone would be able to kill her when the dog was in the vicinity, and the dog apparently never left her side. On May 19th of 1980, Joanna went out to dinner with Hansen in Seward, and according to the baker, Messina offered him sex in exchange for money. Hansen refused to pay and refused to release her, so he drove her and her dog to a remote area near the Snow River. It was here that Hansen struck Messina with his .22 caliber revolver before shooting her twice and the dog once. He dumped Messina's body in a gravel pit while the dog and her belongings were thrown into the woods. Hansen tossed the gun into the Snow River. Messina was discovered by authorities, who were called to the scene because her body was being eaten by a bear. When John Lucking, the investigator, arrived on the scene, the bear was gone, and tragically, large pieces of her body were gone as well. In fact, while he and his colleagues were conducting their scene investigation, the bear returned. Lucking and his team tried scaring the bear off, but this only made it angrier and more protective of its food. Because black bears are a protected species in Alaska, Lucking had to call in the Fish and Wildlife Police to dispatch the bear to prevent further destruction to the key evidence in their homicide investigation. Ironically, if it wasn't for the bear, perhaps Messina's body would have remained unrecovered, which tragically was the case for several of Hansen's victims. John Daly, Anchorage police officer, said that, quote, Hansen would take his victims to the Canuck River area for privacy. They could run, but there was nowhere for them to go. Canuck River was the preferred location for Robert Hansen. Out of the 17 victims he would later acknowledge in his confession, 10 of them were marked there. An 11th victim, known as Eklunta Annie, was discovered southwest of the Canuck River. Hansen often flew to the river by plane, but occasionally drove his four-wheel drive Subaru out there as well. One of Hansen's first murders was an unidentified woman whose remains were found in July of 1980, 1 mile south of South Eklunta Lake Road. The woman was referred to as Eklunta Annie. and she was estimated to have died a year before her discovery. When Hansen confessed, he admitted to kidnapping her, but when, quote, his truck became stuck in the mud, the woman tried to run. Hansen said she had a knife in her purse, and he used it to stab her in the back. On September 6th of 1980, Lisa Futrell met Hansen at the nightclub where she worked. When the 41-year-old woman didn't return home after her September 7th work shift, her two roommates reported her missing. Authorities found her body on May 9th of 1984, buried next to a gravel pit south of the former Knickarn Bridge. On April 24th of 1984, Malai Larson was found in a parking lot near the same bridge where Futrell was discovered. Larson was 28 years old at the time of her murder, and she was reported missing on July 10th of 1981. Tamara, or Tammy Peterson, was a 24-year-old dancer at a nightclub in Anchorage who Hansen targeted in 1982. Peterson's family last heard from her on August 7th, when she called them on the phone and told them she was offered money to pose for photographs. Her body was found on April 29th of 1984, about 1.5 miles from the Knick Bridge. On November 16th of 1981, Sherry Moreau told her friend, Lisa Nyland, that she met a man who offered her $300 for a professional photography session. That would be the last time that Nyland would ever see Moreau again. Nearly 1 year later, on September 12th of 1982, off-duty officer John Daly was hunting near the Knick River and discovered a human kneecap near the banks. Daly and his fellow hunters called in the state troopers, who recovered Moreau's body from a shallow grave. Moreau had 3 gunshot wounds to the back. The shell casings for the rounds was eventually discovered. The caliber was .223, and these cartridges would eventually be matched to a Ruger Mini 14. An odd thing about Moreau's discovery was that she was found fully clothed, but there were no bullet holes in the clothing, just her body, meaning that Hansen likely shot Moreau while she was naked and then redressed her after she had died before burying her. Paula Golding was a 31-year-old topless dancer who went missing in April of 1983. Like the other women, she was promised by Hansen hundreds of dollars to go with him. When police found Golding's body, there were more .223 shell casings at her burial site, and they linked those with the casings found in Sherry Moreau's case. Moreau and Golding's discoveries were crucial to the case, as the matching casings shifted the investigation from seemingly unrelated murders to a serial killer on the loose. The police asked the state troopers for help, and in the fall of 1983, a task force was formed to examine the cold cases of the missing and unidentified women in the Alaskan wilderness. The 7th and last identified victim that was found along the Knick River was 23-year-old Sue Luna, who agreed to meet with Hansen for a photo shoot. On May 26th of 1982, she met Hansen in a diner parking lot. She was reported missing the next day, and her body was discovered on April 24th of 1983. Hansen confessed that he had released Luna free into the forest so he could, quote, hunt her like an animal while she was stripped naked and killed by gunshot. Something notable was that Robert Hansen didn't confess to his murders until the winter. Although he helped identify grave sites following his confession, authorities had to wait until spring so the ground could thaw before digging. One of Hansen's victims that wasn't found along the Knick River, or even discovered at all, was Roxanne Eastland, who was last seen on June 28th of 1980. Eastland was staying with her boyfriend at the Budget Motel in Anchorage when she was supposed to meet a man on 4th Avenue in downtown later that day. Eastland was never heard from again, and Hansen admitted to killing her, but her body has never been found. Another woman who was never found was Andrea Mona Altieri, a 23-year-old exotic dancer who was reported missing by her girlfriend on December 2nd, 1981. She went out to meet Hansen for a photo shoot, and like so many of his other victims, she was never heard from again. What she wore to the meeting was crucial in Hansen's investigation and later arrest. Altieri was reported to have been wearing a golden-colored ring with 1 pearl, another golden-colored ring with 2 pearls, an antique wedding band set with a rose-set top, and a custom-made golden necklace shaped like a salmon with a diamond set as the eye. 3 other women became Hansen's victims in 1983. Angela Lynn Fettern, a 24-year-old dancer, was reported missing in May that year when the owner of the nightclub she worked at realized she hadn't shown up for work. Fettern was found on April 26th of 1984 near Figure 8 Lake. 22-year-old Delynn Renee Frey was last seen in March of '83 when she was kidnapped and murdered by Hansen. Frey became a Jane Doe after she was discovered on a sandbar near the Knick River by a pilot who practice landings there on August 20th of 1985. However, it wouldn't be until 1989 that Frey would be identified when a state trooper recognized her jewelry from a case file photo. On March 25th of 1983, 22-year-old Teresa Watson told her roommate that she'd be meeting a man for $300 in exchange for an hour of company. Watson met with Hansen at Scenic Lake, where she was abducted and killed. However, Hansen was unable to bury Watson because the region he was in was still frozen. So he abandoned her body, which was found a year later on April 26th of 1984. I emphasize all these names and give the specific accounts because these were all women whose lives were ended too short by a monster. And had Hansen been allowed to continue this rampage, tragically, many more would have likely followed. And the perpetrator of these killings would likely have never seen justice if it wasn't for one woman. The one woman who stopped this entire string of killing and finally brought Hansen to justice. Cindy Paulson. Hey, so as you've probably noticed up till now in the video, my voice sounds kind of bad because I was starting to get sick. So I'm like, okay, I'll wait a few days till I feel better to finish recording. And the sickness has got much worse. And I'm now in an even worse place vocally than I was at the beginning. And I've waited too long. And I did this to myself. There's really no point in explaining this to you other than to say I'm stupid, which I am. So let's jump back to the summer of 1983 and continue Cindy Paulson's story where we last left off. You know, running for her life on the airfield, narrowly escaping from Hansen's car the morning after her kidnapping and rape. Paulson sprinted as fast as she could, heading to a car lot. She planned to hide behind one of the cars, and as she was running, she saw a Ford truck and flagged the driver down. The driver asked if Paulson was okay before seeing Hansen running towards the truck. Paulson climbed in and the driver headed towards the police station. But, being a sex worker, Paulson assumed that the cops wouldn't believe her, so she asked the driver to stop at the Big Timber Motel where Paulson was staying. The driver was freaked out by all of this because she's saying that this guy's going to kill her, and now the girl is saying don't go to the police, go instead to this motel. So out of fear that something's going on or that Hansen would find them, the driver refused. So Paulson ended up getting out of the truck near the Mush Inn, another motel in Anchorage, where she called her pimp Mr. Franklin. The two of them went to the Big Timber, where police showed up as the driver ended up calling the police. Because of course that guy called the police. He's just a normal dude who a woman gets into the truck and says that guy's going to kill her and she can't go to the police because they won't believe her. As soon as she gets out of the car, I'm calling the cops. Like, I don't care if they believe you or not. That guy has a gun. That's priority one right now. When the authorities found Paulson, she was still wearing her handcuffs and covered in blood. Mr. Franklin, again the pimp, went looking for Hansen, presumably to kill him. The police took Paulson to the hospital and examined her and administered a rape kit. Rape kits at the time were simply to see if there was evidence of a rape having occurred, as there was no DNA testing for that at the time. During Paulson's escape back at Merrill Airfield, a security guard noticed some suspicious activity and, despite not making contact, the guard wrote the license tag from Hansen's car. You know, suspicious activity potentially including things like driving up with a woman who's handcuffed, who you intend to put on a plane. When the police showed up at the airfield, the guard corroborated Paulson's story and revealed the tag information on Hansen's car. See, all of this would have cut out a lot of middle steps if she would have just went to the police. I understand that she thought due to her line of work, the police wouldn't trust her. And you know what? Maybe if she just walked in and said this dude was trying to kill her with no evidence, sure, maybe. But I feel like the blood and the handcuffs and the fact that there are records of this guy around, you know, leading up to this, feel like that would have been, you know, the smart move. But regardless, don't mean that to diminish her. She got away, and that's cool. And from everything she did, she stopped this guy, and that's really cool. Just, you know, even if they don't believe you, that's on them, not you. When police tracked him down by the license plate, they found that the interior of the home matched Paulson's description of her kidnapping and rape. When Hansen was brought in for questioning, his alibi was that he was helping his friend install a seat in the back of his airplane at the time of Paulson's story. When they asked Hansen's friend, John Henning, he vouched for Hansen. Furthermore, Hansen claimed that Paulson was causing all this trouble because he refused to pay her more for her sex work. The police sided with Hansen and started to turn on Paulson, accusing her of making it all up. All right, maybe it was a little harsh on her a second ago. Maybe her reasons for not wanting to go to the police, maybe a little bit justified. I mean, think about Hanson's friend. What an animal. Like, imagine one of your boys comes up to you. They're like, hey, if the cops ask, I was helping you at this time on this date, right? So you're like, okay, cool. And then the police come up and you give them the alibi. And then the police are like, okay, well, he's wanted for rape and serial killing. Are you still like, yeah, he was here for sure. Like, if a friend of mine needed me to lie to the cops for him, I would assume it was over, like, I don't know, drug possession or like maybe stealing something. And it's like, sure, an alibi, whatever. But if my boy is getting wrapped into like a serial killer spree, they can have him. It's not my boy anymore. That's a demon. Paulson's early suspicions were correct. The authorities didn't listen to her because she was a prostitute. The assistant DA at the time decided there was no proof that Paulson ever went to Hanson's house, so they closed the case. Okay, well, maybe I was wrong a moment ago. I apologize, Cindy. But what do you do in that case, right? Like, you're running from a guy and he's done this to multiple people and the authorities won't believe you. I mean, unless you just want to figure out a way to kill him yourself, I don't know what you do. Maybe get the press involved, maybe, and try to cause enough of a stink that people want something done, assuming that, someone's even willing to tell the story. Life went on for Cindy Paulson. Mr. Franklin had her back on the streets, working an after-hours club rife with sex workers. Mr. Franklin had also just received a half-pound shipment of cocaine. And for Police Sergeant Glenn Fothe, who was building his own investigation against Hanson, he couldn't risk his best witness getting caught up in a drug bust. So because of Paulson's proximity to crime, even the people who believed that Hanson was a killer and knew that Cindy would be a good witness had to keep her at arm's length from the case, so if she goes down, it doesn't hurt the whole case. Paulson would later disappear, but Sergeant Fothe found her sometime during the spring of 1984. She was working at a rundown topless club in Anchorage under another pimp, completely strung out on cocaine. Eventually, Sergeant Fothe was able to take Paulson away and, with her permission, stash her in a safe house. His goal was to clean her up and get her ready for a possible courtroom appearance. The irony was that the people who operated the safe house attended the same church as Robert and Darla Hanson. Cindy Paulson's escape forced Hanson to curb his killing spree. I mean, the police are looking at him that hard, and again, Cindy's still out there to tell the story. Because of this, there would be no victims until his eventual arrest. Despite a body being found during this period, it would later be revealed that the victim was killed before Paulson's escape. During her questioning, Paulson made it clear that Robert Hanson had killed before. The butcher Baker had even implied as much, telling her that there were other girls he kidnapped and taken to his cabin. So even though it took some time to get the guy charged, because of Cindy, no more women were murdered. Jim McCann, an Alaskan state trooper who was a member of the task force assembly after the discovery of Sherry Moreau and Paula Golding on the Knik River, recalled, quote, going through all the material the Anchorage police had and started to find out more about the Cindy Paulson case, who got away, and about this guy named Robert Hanson. That light went on for me real quick. When Cindy Paulson was brought back in by the Alaska State Troopers to record a new statement on September 27th of 1983, a new approach to Hanson's investigation was formed. Robert Hanson's case was one of the earliest examples of behavioral profiling assisting a serial murder case. In the fall of 1983, the State Troopers Department sent materials from the Paulson case as well as other incidents related to 3 recovered bodies they found to the FBI Academy. At the Bureau, John Douglas met with the Alaska State Troopers to help with the profile of the perpetrator. Along with Douglas, Robert Ressler was known for creating, quote, a typology of sex murderers and forming the National Center for Analysis of Violent Crime. This resource helped the FBI study behavior patterns and characteristics that advance offender profiling as a science. In fact, Douglas wrote an autobiography about his time with the FBI and his development of the department, which became the basis for the 2017 Netflix series Mindhunter. After reviewing the material from the state troopers, the FBI concluded that the profile pointed towards a man likely to stutter, be an excellent hunter, and a hard-working provider or businessman, and that he would likely have a wife who was unaware of his activities. Which, nail on the head as far as that goes. Every detail down to his stutter, the FBI predicted correctly. The FBI also said that the killer was most likely to keep tokens of his victims, like rings and other jewelry, close, and he keeps them to view in privacy. McCann, along with the other troopers, ended up looking closer at Robert Hanson. McCann spoke with Hansen's alibi witness, John Henning, who eventually rolled over and admitted that he had lied. This was the cherry on top of the accumulated evidence to give probable cause. So, on October 27th of 1983, the police issued a search warrant for all of Robert Hansen's properties, including his home, planes, and vehicles. Authorities began searching Hansen's properties starting at 6:30 in the morning that day, starting with his bakery, where 2 troopers surveilled Hansen until he finished work. At 8:26, roughly 2 hours later, Hansen was contacted by the 2 troopers and agreed to be transported to the department for an interview. Before they go, Hansen's advised of his rights. In the interview room, as is typical with these interviews, Hansen was left alone at his desk for a while to absorb the tension. Authorities watched as Hansen became aware of the setup. On the desk were piles and piles of file folders that contained names of hunting and fishing associates on them. One of them opened to a page where his wife's picture was pasted, with her name written across the top. Next to it, photos of several of his victims were arranged so they faced Hansen when he sat down. On the wall hung a huge map of the Knik River area. As the interview began, investigators searched Hansen's home, which held, quote, jewelry from several of the missing women, a rifle that matched the bullet casings found at the murder scenes, and a map of the Alaskan bush with dozens of X marks. Which that's pretty, I mean, I understand these serial killers keep trophies because they're obsessed with them, but you got a map with X's where everyone is, and you got the gun you used to shoot them, and then their stuff. I mean, if you ever wanted to be dead to rights caught, you've got the material for it. As you can imagine, these marks matched the locations where Hansen's victims were later found. As for the jewelry, Hansen gave some of it to Darla and his daughter over the years. Neither of them knew where it came from. It just so happened that during this time, Robert Hansen's mother was in town visiting. Which, great timing for her. The police didn't know what to do with her. They didn't have, a warrant for questioning or searching her stuff. They didn't even plan for her to be there. So Robert's wife Darla saved the day and found a friend who could host her mother-in-law while the cops searched the house. In total, it took 17 hours from the time they surveyed Hansen's bakery at 6:30 in the morning to conclude the search of his properties. It took 6 hours to properly go through his home, a 5-hour interview with Hansen himself, but the most important piece of the operation was recovering the murder weapon, the Ruger Mini 14 that was used on the women found along the Knik River. Hansen casually mentioned that the rifle was in his boat, which was not listed in the search warrant. The authorities needed to get permission from the judge first, but when they searched the boat, the Mini 14 wasn't there. It was found stashed in Hansen's attic along with several other weapons. But by saying that line stupidly off the bat, it let the police also search his boat. So great job, idiot. Investigators pieced together the rest of the investigation in the following weeks after the search. They discovered a fraudulent burglary insurance claim Hansen filed in 1981, which reported his own hunting trophy stolen. But the troopers recognized it in the residence: a bear rug, a wolverine, and a grizzly hide, walrus tusks, and of course, his world record doll sheep mount. So all the stuff that he reported that was stolen was just in his house. The settlement he collected was used towards a Piper Cup, a plane he would use to fly women to the Knik River. Hansen was as entitled as he was cold-blooded. He casually filed a burglary claim to help facilitate his killing spree. On February the 27th of 1984, Robert Hansen appeared before Superior Court Judge Ralph Moody and pleaded guilty to the rape and kidnapping of Cindy Paulson. The prosecutor, Frank Rothschild, described Hansen as a man who lived among the community for 17 years, serving them donuts and coffee. A monster hidden behind a pleasant smile. When the prosecution announced that Hansen confessed to the killing of 17 victims, Cindy Paulson ran out of the room crying. When it came to Robert Hansen's turn to speak, he said nothing. Fred Dewey, Hansen's attorney, didn't mount an argument and told the court it was his client's wish that nothing be said further on Hansen's behalf. What was negotiated happened outside of the courtroom, beforehand, away from the victims' loved ones, the attorneys, or the press. Hansen made a plea bargain. He confessed to 17 murders, but was only formally convicted of 4, which spared him separate trials. The conditions of this plea bargain were that there would be no press access to him, and Hansen would serve his time in federal prison outside of Alaska so as to not encounter anyone connected to the women. As for a possible death penalty, which is what the community wanted, as you could imagine, Alaska had none. So a life in prison was always going to be the outcome. In the courtroom, Judge Moody delivered the final sentence: 461 years. From that day in court, Hansen helped troopers to the burial sites as part of his plea deal. And despite his admission to killing 17 victims, the actual estimation points towards somewhere in the 20s. Robert Hansen was sent to federal prison in Pennsylvania, but apparently didn't get along with the other inmates, so he served some time in Minnesota before returning to Alaska in May of 1988. 2 years later, in 1990, prison employees discovered that his cell contained an aeronautical chart, a hand-knit winter hat, magazine articles on plastic explosives, and correspondence with the Juneau boat broker. The prison superintendent at Lemon Creek Correctional Center called it the, quote, bust of the decade, since it prevented Hansen from carrying out his presumed escape plan. Hansen was later transferred to the newly opened Spring Creek Correctional Center in Seward. Even behind bars, Hansen calculated his own self-freedom that defined him in the free world. And the self-freedom was effectively doing nothing and being a hermit. Shocker. In 2006, the Associated Press requested an interview, but Hansen declined and wrote a typo-filled, unsigned letter stating that he felt journalists had hurt his family. Yeah, the journalist. Or what hurt your family, not the 20 women you murdered and then gave the jewelry from their bodies to your wife and daughter. Not you. The journalist. It was an odd response, and perhaps best conveys his psychiatric state, appealing to the press that recognized his own family suffering, but never himself acknowledging the families of the victims he killed. I also just think it's funny how, as part of Hansen's plea deal, he's like, hey, I don't have to go back to Alaska, right? And they're like, no, you don't have to be in Alaska. They probably don't like you there. And then he's in jail for 4 years, and they're like, move him back to Alaska, please, thank you. Darla Hansen filed for divorce after Hansen confessed in 1984. Once the case became public, their children were bullied relentlessly, and so Darla sold the house and the bakery and moved from Alaska to Arkansas to be closer to her family. Robert Hansen died from natural causes on August 21st of 2014 at the age of 75 years old. In his obituary in the Anchorage Daily News, a quote was used from Sergeant Flothy. Quote, "The world is better without him." Investigators are still working on recovering the missing victims. With the advancement of DNA technology and genetic genealogy research, they were able to find Robin Pelkey in 2021. At the time of her death, Robin was a 19-year-old sex worker who had been, quote, living on the streets of Anchorage when she was killed by Robert Hansen. Again, the body was previously unidentified, but in 2021, a bone sample was sent to a lab for additional DNA extraction, where it was later examined for whole genome sequencing. In other words, it reads every single letter of an organism's complete DNA code, all 3 billion base pairs. When Pelkey's DNA profile was uploaded into a public access genealogy database, troopers found several close matches that were used to create a family tree, which helped identify Pelkey. Even a decade after Hansen's own death, work is still being done to bring these women their names and identities back. Robert Hansen's case entered popular culture through books, documentary accounts, and crime television, culminating in a film adaptation in 2013 called The Frozen Ground, which, as you can imagine, dramatized the investigation. John Cusack played Robert Hansen, while Nicolas Cage played an Alaskan state trooper. On this channel, it's no secret that looks can be deceiving. I mean, look at the video we did about Cowboy Bob. Although Robert Hansen did not look the part of a monster serial killer, his unassuming presence allowed him to avoid suspicion, compounded by his hunting skills and plain access, which allowed him free rein to exploit the Alaskan wild. But make no mistake, Hansen was a calculated predator who knew exactly what he was doing on preying on the women he did. He used the seedy underbelly of Anchorage at the time to get rid of people who he thought society wouldn't miss. Robert Hansen didn't get away with murder because he was clever. He was able to kill as a free man for as many years as he did because, tragically, Paulson was right. Sometimes, when certain people have stories or go missing, the authorities just didn't care. And that's just as much part of the crime scene as the Kinnick River. Every police report that didn't get filed, every missing person that didn't garner a second look, all of that equated just as much to the death count as Hansen and his gun. Perhaps there's a map still out there with a mark on it without a match to the name. But society has been catching up, evidenced by the recovery of Robin Pelkey. And even now, decades later, when one monster causes that much damage, the work around it still isn't finished. But now, as opposed to when the guy was alive and still killing, we can at least say that the work's being done. Like I said at the beginning of the video, Robert Hansen is obviously a monstrous man, but there's so many elements of the story that I feel are worth remembering. The guy being allowed to continue this murder spree for so long because of his place in the community and the fact that people simply didn't take him as a bad guy. The police having ample evidence across different counties and an entire profile they could have built to know this guy was a threat, but just didn't. And of course, even though, yes, after she came forward, it seems Hansen didn't kill again, the fact that Paulson and so many sex workers weren't believed for so long led to Hansen being able to kill more. And of course, the fact that one girl's willingness to survive undid everything. Her ability to fight and her ability to run is what got this guy thrown in jail. And I think that's fantastic. And even though this story is monstrous, I think it's worth remembering because of her. And hopefully you think it's worth remembering as well, and you got something out of this awful story, and we really appreciate it. And above all else, we just want to say thank you for watching. I apologize for the upload schedule on this channel being so, topsy-curvy and whatnot. I've been traveling a ton and trying to get a bunch of other projects started and things like that. So a lot of the times I'll have a really narrow window for when I can do stuff and check things off. But I apologize that my previous promises of consistent uploads have suffered because of that. I'm a very bad man, and you should yell at me for it in the comments. I'm sorry. But I appreciate the support anyway. The channel's been doing fantastic. Your guys' comments have been great. Everyone over here at Wendigoon is really happy that you guys are enjoying it as much as you are, and it really does mean the most that you're sticking around. Weekly uploads over here on Wendigoon, like once or twice a month, and Wendiglitch, hypothetically one day, maybe. Also, the control flavor that I came up with is still for sale. Try out the Blueberry Cobbler at drinkcontrol or drinkctrl.com/Wendigoon. I think you can also use discount code Wendigoon to get like 10% off. Probably should have mentioned that previously. Whoops. Everyone who made this video possible will be credited in the description, so be sure to show them some love. And all in all, I believe that should do it for now, but before I go, we just want to say thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next one. Fuck! And I know I was like bad at calling it out earlier, but the fact that the police did not believe Paulson when she's showing up handcuffed, clothes ripped off of her, covered in blood, it's like, what? Like, think about it. She's not even the one who contacted the police. I wouldn't, but you could almost understand if like a girl calls the police and the police come to the motel she's at and it's her and the pimp and the guy's nowhere to be seen. And they're like, no, we swear this happened. Then you could see some of the suspicion. But remember, it was the random truck driver that picked her up that called the police. It's like, there's this girl covered in blood, blah, blah, blah. The police find her at a hotel. She's covered in blood and freaking out. And the police are like, oh yeah, the old prostitute's gambit, seen it a dozen times back in Chicago. It's like, what? What could possibly be the play here? And then you have the pimp like, I'm going to go kill him. And he leaves. And the police are like, yeah, not going to get me this time. Fool for this last spring. It's like, what were they possibly afraid of? Why do you not believe that person? Again, I talked about it in videos. Every time there's one of these investigations, the police like chase their tail for 5 years until someone's like, hey, it's actually this guy. And the police are like, of course, knew it all along. Thank you for telling me what I already knew. You're welcome.